Yes, it seems a long time ago that I started up the Green Business Company. It was actually 89, and it formed into the Green Stationery Company about 3 years later. And as we concentrated on the stationery side. But the Green Stationery Company was set up initially as a green business right from the outset. And the primary purpose of that business was to deliver environmental benefits within the stationery and paper industry. Our primary goal was not bottom line profit and shareholder value. Our business, this is the normal way that you assess business success, measured through profit and turnover. But such accounting methods that are very traditional don't really tell you what an enterprise provides and whether it has any value to nature and people, who are obviously part of nature as well too. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to deliver real value in what we do in our enterprise. We're not trying to just deliver transactional value, that is turnover and profit. And it's a very important distinction between what a green business is and what a traditional business is. In fact, it's notable that recently the CEO of Centrica Gas received a £2 million bonus for increasing shareholder value, while many of his customers were reduced to poverty, and Centrica is releasing more CO2 than it ever has done before. What we have to do is first of all look at the overall economy, because the overall economy is actually just an amalgam of business and enterprise activities. So when we talk about growth in GDP, that's just turnover and transactions within businesses which are all amalgamated together. When Adam Smith came up with his Wealth of Nations in the 1850s to try and describe this big economy, this amalgamation of all businesses, with his traditional theory of economics, he was heavily criticized at the time, because within his economic theory, he wasn't looking at actual useful value to people and society and the environment. He was just looking at transactional value. That is, what we pay for something or what somebody else is willing to pay for an item. And one of the critics at the time was James Maitland. I think I've got a picture of him here. I think I can get him up on here. Let's try and get that one down. Okay. You're sharing the screen. No.
If you go up to the green view share.
Yeah, I don't think if I do that, I think it will. Sorry about this. I'll get these pictures up in a moment. Oh, I'm sorry. It's because it's not a touch screen. Right.
Else here to help you.
I think I can get this one. Right, there we go. There we go. It's not a touch screen. There he is. That's James Maitland. So James Maitland was writing in about 1800, about 50 years before Adam Smith was writing about economic theories. And he was the MP for Malmesbury and for Newport. And he also had a title of Lord Lauderdale, because you couldn't be an MP in those days unless you were a lord or landed gentry or something like that. But he formulated in 1800, he formulated the Lauderdale paradox. And it's something that Adam Smith and Ricardo and many of the economists afterwards, even today, have had difficulty dealing with. And the paradox simply states that personal wealth can only be derived from the reduction in general welfare of people and the environment. Maitland illustrated this by the example of if one could, for instance, monopolize water that had previously been freely available by placing locks on the wells. If you were able to do that, the measured riches of the nation would be increased at the expense of the growing thirst of the population. It's quite a prescient example for the time, really. And this lack of real value inherent in our economic system has led to many of today's leading economists to dismiss the importance of the climate crisis. One Oxford economist, Wilfred Beckerman, in 1995, in his sad work, Small is Stupid, said, because the main impact of climate falls on agriculture in the USA, and it's just 3% of the USA's GDP, even if the net output of US agriculture fell by 50%, by the end of the 21st century, this is only 1.5% of GDP. He concluded, therefore, business as usual in the face of climate change, because there would be negligible effects on the economy. This, of course, fails to fundamentally understand that America is the breadbasket of the world, and if it lost 50% of its agricultural output, most Americans would be in poverty, and indeed it would cause a worldwide famine. And this is the sort of argument that economists can make when they just look at transactional wealth and transactional growth as well, without actually having some idea of real useful value to people and indeed to the environment. A green business, in our view, should create this useful value. But most businesses still take the view that profit and economic growth on its own, without any values to it, can still be the prime motivation for business in the face of the environmental challenge, as long as the environmental and social impacts are reduced. And that then creates what is termed a sustainable business. A sustainable business is basically trying to ameliorate the negative impacts of the standard economy, because they know the standard economy can't deliver on environmental issues at all. So you have to adopt sustainability measures and other social measures in order to deal with that economy. And that is what sustainability is for businesses. Basically, the sustainable business model is an attempt to overcome the problem with the economy, which doesn't measure efficiency, it externalizes environmental and social degradation. The three pillars of sustainability, according to the UN, are people, planet, and the economy. Two of these pillars are useful existing things like a planet and people. The third is a human construct, mainly defined by those who hold economic and political power. But the economy is just a version of many possible economies, but it is the current dominant economy, and it's the engine that is behind the damage to our planet and people. Great prize-winning Nobel economist prize winners have tried to create whole new structures of sustainable economy as well, which are different from the standard one. And there was a chap called William Nordhaus, who is one of the foremost sustainable economy theoreticians. And he's tried to price all the environmental damage and that's caused by economic activity, and separate that out from other economic activity so that you're working on good economic activity rather than bad economic activity. And this approach has been mirrored in sustainable business practices as well, where businesses basically try to reduce their harmful activities while still pursuing profit and growth. From a green perspective, this approach is fundamentally flawed. It's seeking a reductionist solution to what is essentially a systemic problem. Indeed, William Nordhaus's model attempts to break down economic transition into many, many parts, and it's actually called the dice model. That is dice as in cutting up carrots rather than rolling the dice. I mean, it's that down to small pieces of cutting up of the economy. But the problem with seeking these sort of technical solutions is we don't know the impact of technological change can have on the overall ecosystems. So there was a real problem even in the 1850s in the UK with soil degradation, and very low yields were experienced, and the Victorian England was having a real problem with trying to grow anything at all. And first of all, they scurried around off to the Waterloo battlefield and dug up all the bones, which they ground up into bone meal and put on the fields of the UK. And then they scurried off to Sicily and dug up all the catacombs there as well, and ground all the bones down and put those on the fields as well. When they ran out of bone meal, they then decided, right, we can go off to an island off Peru and dig up guano from the seagulls that are all there. And at that time, slavery had just been abolished. This is about sort of 1870s or something like that. And so they couldn't use slaves to dig up the guano. And so they had indentured labor from China, the coolies, who spent their whole life digging up guano on these islands day in, day out, night out. And they even had to build fences around the island, particularly where the cliffs were, to stop the coolies throwing themselves off the cliffs, because the conditions were so utterly appalling. And that guano really kept the UK agricultural sector functioning in the late Victorian period, until, of course, they discovered oil-based fertilizers. And so the solution then was to put oil-based fertilizers. And of course, all that did is just produce nitrogen pollution and fossil fuel dependency, which we've now got in agriculture. So the technical solution doesn't solve the problem. It just creates problems later on, as well as a lot of unpleasantness in people's lives as well, too, on the way. This is why Greens seek a holistic solution and to the damage that's caused by economic reduction. Attempts to integrate social and environmental costs into the market system can't really succeed. Whales and trees have market value, but that's not save the forests and it's not save the whales. Like much of wildlife, it's been destroyed by an expansion of a system that is wrecking their habitats and ecosystems, not because the market puts no value on them. Business sustainability over the last 30 years has resulted in an acceleration of environmental damage because the steps taken to ameliorate the destruction have been outweighed by the increase in damaging economic activity, including the billions now being spent on sustainability projects, conferences, and other eco-technological dead ends. This is not to say that useful sustainable business practices like recycling, reducing waste, reducing energy consumption should not be undertaken by businesses. Rather, that they have very little impact on the climate and ecosystem crisis if the current economic system continues to expand. The global awareness of the of climate change has created international demands to stop releasing carbon into the atmosphere. But most businesses cannot stop all their carbon emissions. Thus, the concept of net zero carbon goals were created. The idea was that the remaining 20% or less of a business's activities that were still unsustainable and that produced carbon after all their sustainability measures had been taken would be offset by carbon capture through planting trees or technology that removes carbon from the atmosphere. That's the idea behind net zero. However, many businesses cannot lower their carbon emissions at all through sustainability practices. And what they intend to do is to lower their to offset all of their carbon emissions. And this really means they just carry on as normal. And the people who are doing this, the people who are having to offset not 20% of what's left after doing their sustainability programs, but most of what they're doing, most of these businesses are big global monopolistic corporations like oil companies, airlines, agro businesses, pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, and the tech giants. They're all the people, you see the adverts that say, we're moving towards net zero. And what do they mean by that? Well, hopefully I've explained to you a bit about what net zero is and what it's designed to do. The big problem is that the net zero policies of these big businesses, and indeed the governments who take up and promote this as well, is there's not enough space on the planet to plant the trees that would offset all of their emissions. Nor is there any technology out there at the moment that can remove trillions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere. And carbon capture is a central plank that you hear the government talking about its net zero targets all the time. But that technology doesn't exist at the moment. There are some small scale things going on, but nothing on the scale that we're talking of here in order to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the idea of offsetting and carbon capture is just a complete fantasy. It cannot work. It hasn't worked for the last 30 years, and it certainly can't work for the next crucial 15 years as we approach the tipping point of the climate crisis. The easiest way to take carbon out of the atmosphere is to restore the ecosystems that lock the carbon in. Forests, coral reefs, peat bogs, etc. But these are precisely the ecosystems being destroyed by businesses. Indeed, it is likely now that the carbon emissions from the destruction of ecosystems now accounts for more carbon release into the atmosphere than the emissions from the global economy, which are the only things they're talking about controlling. The one-trick pony of carbon emissions doesn't do anything to deal with the actual environmental problems that we're facing. It does nothing to do, it has nothing to say about ecosystem loss. And the governments and corporations are absolutely wedded to this idea because they like the idea of quantitative targets. And of course, quantitative targets are easily manipulated. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics, as one famous man once said. They're easily manipulated and very inherently complex, that the government and corporations can claim to be addressing environmental crisis even as it worsens. And really, it's very difficult to argue about their technological figures. So we want to run a green business. What are we going to do then? It's all very well saying, this stuff has not been working for a long time. So what are we going to do? What we have to do is have a business that has minimal impact while delivering its goals. A green business should live lightly on the earth. It's the opposite to the normal idea of success, where you must leave your mark on the earth. A green business doesn't leave a mark. It should be able to do what it wants to do and go about its business without causing any damage to the environment at all. That should be the aim. This is a very different from the standard model, where enterprises are mainly concerned with growth and profit, and they're seeking to become larger, mainly because they enjoy greater profits through scale and through market domination. The sustainable business view is that profit and growth are still required, even when you're doing sustainable business, along with a bit of environmental management. And this view is summed up by Paul Polman, who's the former CEO of Unilever. And he makes it quite clear that, yes, he understands we've got to detach what we're doing from what the economy is doing from the environment, but he still thinks you've got to still go for that increased profit and turnover. Ultimately, he says, we need to answer how we can have a sustainable economy which decouples growth from resource consumption and environmental degradation. So this guy understands what is required, and he's the CEO of one of the major companies in the UK. But he also says, and at the same time, not have many people in poverty. If we don't solve that in total, nothing is going to work. So his idea is, if you try and create businesses that don't pursue growth and turnover and profit, that you won't be able to deal with people's economic aspirations, and indeed you will push people into poverty. But that's because his view of the economy is based on the standard model. But as we have seen, that economic standard model doesn't represent useful value, and the wealth benefits even that are increasing are actually enjoyed only by a few people. And at the Green Stationery Company, what we tried to do was to limit our turnover by not engaging in selling activities or using extensive advertising or employing salespeople or offering low price deals. This is the sort of thing that goes on in our industry. And what we do is completely at odds with that normal practice. In our industry, running a green business the way we do is not actually seen as successful, even though we've been doing it for 30 years. Because we haven't reached very high turnovers or shown huge profit margins, we've virtually been ignored by the whole industry. We've never had an award from anybody in the stationery industry at all. We've never been on the list of most successful green businesses in the UK that Times publishes or something like that. In 30 years of doing a deep green business, we've never been recognised because we're not doing a standard business, because we're doing something very, very different. And it's completely counter to the way that the normal businesses operate. Because we're aiming to break even rather than maximise our profits. We've always been a small micro business with our turnover less than 500,000 and employing less than 4 people. But from our environmental perspective, we believe we've been very successful because we've been able to keep that business going, purely focused on what our value goals are, rather than what our standard economic goals are. And we kept it going for 30 years, and we have about 2,000 customers across the UK at any one time. So there's a lot of people using us and want to use a business like us as well. But our business model not only has environmental benefits, it also has more efficient, it operates in a much more efficient way than the standard business because we're avoiding economic waste. Our business tries not to engage in activities that don't directly add to the environmental and social value of the products our customers want. In many businesses, these non-value activities can be a huge part of your total cost. A good example is the cost of making a traditional shoe would largely be involved in tanning the leather and stitching the shoe together. But if you buy a shoe made by a global brand, the tanning and making will be less than 30% of the overall cost. The rest of the cost is in brand advertising, packaging, transportation networks, all activities that are also damaging the environment. It's not the consumers that demand these non-value costs in their products. It comes about from the needs of the producers. This is why the idea of consumer sovereignty is quite false, because it's the structure of production that determines the consumption and not the other way around. This is why advertising products is a $1 trillion industry in the United States, and why very few large businesses dominate in all market sectors. The result is very little choice for consumers, and in our stationery industry, most suppliers offer the same products, distributed through the same 3 major wholesalers, whereas we, as the Green Stationery Company, are one of the few stationery businesses that have a unique range of green office products. And this is our USP, and how we've created a business strategy of making our business easy to find by consumers and customers who want green products, rather than trying to sell green products to those who have no interest in it, and thereby trying to just increase the size of our business. We're not trying to push people into buying things and down a route that they haven't decided they want to go down. Because we're avoiding a lot of economic waste in what we do, we're not engaging in low price battle for the supply of homogeneous products. Our business is able to make margins that are about 15% higher than the industry's standard. And we're able to have a low, we're able to have a high margin, low volume business. And that can offer better wages and shorter working hours. So we've always paid well above the living wage, and we run our working hours from 10 till 4 now, rather than 9 to 5, because we think that's a reasonable working day. And we don't buy any packaging and for our business, despite the fact that a lot of our stuff goes out on carriers. We just reclaim it all from people locally, because we don't want to generate extra packaging waste. We certainly don't use any plastic packaging at all, and we spend a lot of time trying to get our suppliers not to use plastic packaging as well, which is quite an uphill struggle really at times. We're also very much interested in electronic systems as well too, to try and reduce the impact of our business as well too. So we were very early adopters of ERM systems that some of the big companies out there had. We had our first one up and running in 2007, which was quite a long time ago. But it meant we could move goods around electronically rather than physically moving them around, so we could sort of drop some chips and things rather than things coming to us and going out again, and that sort of reduces our impact as well. And we are very much early adopters of the internet as well too, because that enables us to get out to all those green customers out there and avoid the production of physical business literature and all the waste that it entails. So what I'm saying is our economic model is keeping our costs down because we're looking after the environment. And of course, that puts our profit margin up. You don't have to go for growth and just keep growing your business in order to make sustainable profits. You don't have to do that, although that seems to be the goal of many businesses at the moment. So you might then well ask, let's put the website back up again, since I've done. So you can see what there we are. There we go. No, it's not coming up. Never mind. No, it's not coming up.
Okay.
She might be able to do it. No, it's down there. Yeah. Excellent. So you can see all, we had our first website up in 1997, running off a 386 computer with dial-up. And we believe when the internet came out, this would be a fantastic tool for small businesses like us, sustainable and green businesses like us, to contact their customers. Sadly, of course, now what we found is the normal economic process has taken over, which companies intent on growing the size of their businesses and dominating their markets with their size. And of course, now if you try and run an internet business, you've got to face the competition of Amazon, which totally dominates the internet at the moment and really should be broken up because it's not an efficient company. It doesn't deliver real choice to people either. But we have survived because we were very early adopters of the internet technology, and Google likes us. So that's quite a good thing. But how can we move from having micro businesses like ours into having an economy as we do at the moment, and deal with the whole of Philip Pullman's problem about pushing people into poverty? Because the choice really is, if we really want to make the UK economy sustainable, it should actually shrink, certainly at least by about 30% in size. And immediately we think, oh my goodness, a recession, a hair shirt economy, or even Pol Pot. But a smaller economy can actually be achieved without a drop in living standards. And that can be achieved by reducing the economic waste and producing less things with greater usable value. A small is beautiful economy would mainly consist of micro businesses and would be less engaged with global trade. How is this really possible? If you look at the business structure of the UK, currently micro businesses that employ less than 9 employees like us are actually 95% of all UK businesses, and they employ 32% of people, about a third. And they represent about 20% of turnover. SMEs, small and medium businesses, who employ about 10 to 250 people, are about 5% of the businesses out there. They employ, again, 29%, about a third, and they turn over about 32% of the UK economy. The large businesses with over 250 employees are only 0.1% of businesses, and they employ 29% of the population. No, I've got that wrong. 39% they employ, and they have 49% of the turnover. So we can actually see that half the economy and employment is already composed of micro businesses and SMEs. So we're halfway there almost. The trouble is, the UK's economic policy and most government's policy and most business policy and most media policy, because they have to do what their advertisers like them to do, is really skewed towards supporting those large businesses, of which there are only 8,000 of them. And these businesses employ and gain huge monopolistic profits. They have very low rates of taxation, and they have access to political power as well, to further interest. And it's these large corporations that are largely engaged in the degradation of ecosystems on a scale that is causing the climate crisis. It's also the large companies that are engaged in economic waste. Since they achieve their large turnovers, to do that, they must create an endless artificial demand for their products, for consumer products that people haven't really demanded and have little impact quite often on providing for the needs of the people they sell them to. In fact, it's better for these large corporations that people are dissatisfied with the products that they produce, because they'll come back for more, and therefore the turnover will keep going up. They're engaged in these type of activities because their one thing is in mind is to grow bigger all the time. The loss of large-scale businesses in the UK and in the future would also have little impact on providing for the needs of the UK population in terms of employment. And indeed, it's likely in future that new industrial products will be produced by mechanised robotic AI means, thus actually reducing even the employment benefits of large businesses. What we need is an economy that produces less things, that have little use value, and more things that generally enhance people's lives. Such an economy would be built around a repair and repurposing of products to reduce resource consumption. A repair and reuse economy would employ more people with more purposeful work, delivering individually crafted, durable products, quality products, supplied by low-impact micro businesses. If we look at what's happening with the car industry at the moment, the idea is that the electric vehicles that are being heavily advertised out there at the moment are a solution to the environmental damage caused by cars. But there are actually 1.3 billion cars in the world, and we switched all of those over to electric cars, it would be a complete environmental disaster. The carbon emissions of cars are split about 45% to manufacture and 55% from fuel. And most of that in an electric vehicle would, of course, be transferred to power stations. The amount of minerals and materials that will be needed to create new electric vehicles would cause huge and immense damage. And the whole EV agenda is just business as usual for the car makers. And it's been heavily advertised with a big dose of greenery without any real substance behind it. The environmental alternative is to keep our existing vehicles, maintain them, repair them, upgrade them, and even retrofit them with electric motors if you want. This would use less resources, employ more people, and give a lot of those people more meaningful work as well, rather than just doing repetitive tasks. And they would be produced in a much more efficient way by small, micromanaged, well-managed businesses. We have to act now to move to this type of new economy with small-scale businesses that have environmental and social goals. And they must be primarily focused mainly on those goals. They should be similar to not-for-profit businesses in a way, and not focusing on profits and growth. This year, the UN Climate Panel has stated that if the global temperature increase goes over 2 degrees, the ice caps and the tundra will melt, causing runaway temperature rises that will be completely outside of humanity's control. They estimate that by adding another 1 trillion metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere, it will take the temperature over those 2 degrees. And at the current rate that we're emitting CO2, that will take just 15 years. There are also 5 trillion tons of carbon and fossil fuel assets belonging to corporations and countries, and they certainly intend that those assets will be extracted and burnt and emitted into the atmosphere. This is not a prediction, this is what is actually happening now. And these large, inefficient, economically wasteful corporations are also engaged in an act of wanton genocide against humanity. So we must make our business practices and principles built around the idea that small is beautiful, an economy that treads lightly on the planet, as we have done for 30 years. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Joe. That's wonderful, and it links so well to Professor Jackson, who was at the start of the series, with his idea of post-growth and how you've got to give it up and focus, as you say, on smaller businesses and ones that can keep going and don't damage the economy. So thank you very much for leading that. With those of you who are on Zoom, please pose any questions via the chat facility, and I'll just open the questions up to the room here. Betty.
I'm wondering what materials you use to make your paper.
We are primarily a distributor rather than a maker. Paper is made at very big mills. Sadly, most of them are shut down in the UK, and particularly the recycled paper mills as well too. They shut down about 30 years ago, most of them. So most of our paper comes in from Europe these days. But there is one mill in Hemel Hempstead at Frogmore, which was the first industrial paper mill in the UK and was established in the 1870s. And it's still functioning as a heritage mill. And we get a lot of our papers from them, very interesting ones, because the big paper mills, when you switch them on, will probably produce about 20 tons in an hour. And whereas if you switch on the heritage mill, it will produce about 2 tons in an hour, which means you can make a smaller batch of paper, which is really useful for making unusual papers.
Well, I want to test an idea on you.
I want to test an idea on you. You keep hearing that the fashion industry is producing all this cheap clothing and we have to get rid of it and this, that, and the other. Whereas paper can be made out of clothes, not all clothes though, but some clothes. Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, so the way that paper's made is it's just fibers that interlock across each other. So anything that's fibrous, you can make into a paper. You can even shred up plastic if you want into thin bits of plastic and bind them together and make plastic paper if you want as well too. And we have things, for instance, that this is a very common material. So this is recycled polypropylene. So that's the stuff that you make your drinks bottles out of, and that can be spun, and you can make fabric out of it like this, and you can make fleeces and things like that, and it's all made from recycled bottles, basically. This one, and but yeah, you can make anything that's fibrous. You can make paper out of. So we sell elephant dung paper, for instance, because the elephant poo is full of fibre, and it makes great paper. In effect, the stomach of the elephants, condition the fibres. Obviously, it all gets heat treated and all of that sort of thing. But we make papers from grass and straw. Agricultural waste is a big thing now as well too. People are looking to make papers from different materials rather than from using trees, because the whole tree thing with paper is not quite what it appears. You don't chop down Amazon trees to make paper. It all comes from plantations in Scandinavia and North Germany, which have been there for 200 years and are all sustainably managed, because they supply the paper industry in Europe and have done for a long time. So if you don't have those trees, what are you going to make your paper out of? So that's the issue, Yeah.
Interesting. One other question, if I might, is you mentioned that we went to places and took the bones.
Yes.
Then didn't they raise, I won't use the word, hell about that?
Well, they might have, but at the time, the British Empire was the dominant force in the world, and you could complain about it, but we had big guns.
Right.
Couldn't do much about it.
Amazing. Right.
Thank you. Right, Elle, are there any questions on Zoom in the chat facility? Good. Could I ask you, if before anybody else, 2 questions? I'm very fascinated, because I've been a great recycler of wrapping paper all my life, and I want to show everybody this wonderful material. Can you see? And ask you to take us through that. Is it the same as your briefcase?
No, it's not. No, this is an interesting concept. So this is waste material from the fashion industry, funnily enough. And so what this lady has done, who runs this company, is she gets 2 sheets of waste material, and very colourful as well too. They are, and then she puts a tissue paper between them, so that the material
Feels lovely.
and basically you can use that to wrap up presents, and the wrapping becomes part of the present. So you give the present with the wrapping, and then they reuse it and give a present to somebody else with the same wrapping. So it just keeps on going round and round and round and round.
That's
just
beautiful.
A wonderful thing.
Now, a little bit off topic, but you were the Green Party's marketing arm or marketing director, I believe, in the past. Could you tell us a bit about maybe what you did and why you left?
I was a director of Ecotrade, which was their trading arm in the 90s. And that was responsible for trying to do some to promote green consumer goods, to raise money for the Green Party, and it also produced publications and things like that. But it got very complicated, and in the end, they stopped doing Ecotrade and turned it over to a community interest company, which all the members of the Green Party were involved in sort of running. But yes, it was an interesting time, and the Green Party then was trying to use even selling things like bio-D washing up liquids and things like that, which were not common in the early 90s at all, bio liquids and things. So they were trying to actually do that to raise a bit of money for the Green Party, which in those days was, people really didn't understand what the Green Party was at all. I remember going on I ran the European campaign in Bristol. And I was canvassing, and quite often people would say, "Oh, is that something to do with the Irish?" It was, people really didn't understand at all. But having said that, that was one of the biggest fates in Europe for a Green Party in 89 in the Europeans. But because the first past the post, it didn't win anything, sadly. But I thought you might be interested in these as well too, if you're just want to look at different materials. So this is what we would do for a marker pen.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a marker pen, and it's made from bioplastic from PLA. So it's mainly potato starch, this one. So there's no petroleum products in this. Is not petroleum plastic. And indeed, the whole PLA plastics thing was developed during the Second World War, when we couldn't get petroleum at all. So people worked out how to polymerize starches, basically. So you could polymerize corn starch, potato starch, and you could turn them into plastics. And quite a remarkable thing. So and then this is also a little pot of refill ink for it as well. And you pop the thing on the top when it runs out, and it refills the thing as well too. Now this sort of setup is going to set you back a few pounds, but it's going to last for a long time then. Whereas you can get a cheap disposable plastic thing from China for 50p, and guess the 50p ones sell an awful lot more than these, because everybody's doing stuff on price and not really worrying about what they're actually getting.
Which is so sad. Perhaps you could take us through some of your other products as well and show them to the Zoom audience.
Yeah. So this is again avoiding plastics. So this is a bamboo calculator, and we also have bamboo keyboards. We have bamboo mice as well too. We have our lovely bamboo ruler, which is down there, which is just such a tactile thing, which is the great thing. And bamboo, very, very sustainable product, renewable product. And we get, obviously these come from China, and there are obviously downsides to that as well too, but not if you move them in large quantities on ships, which some of these bamboo distributors do. And we do know where the bamboo is coming from as well too, because it's the manufacturers are actually next to the bamboo forest, which they manage as well too. So they're really great products, and you can avoid all the plastics, and they last forever and ever. And one of the great things about having keys on a bamboo is that all the stuff gets chucked away because the keys all rub off on the plastic. So that's when you change your calculator or your keyboard, is when all the stuff comes off it. But of course, with this, you can just write it back on if you want to.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, you just write it because you can write on bamboo. And I thought I'd show you this last thing as well too. This.
I wasn't sure if that was left over by somebody here.
Well,
because it looks so like the real stapler.
Yeah, somebody from way back when. So this is a properly made stapler. This is made by an Italian family factory in just outside of Turin, and you can feel the weight of it. I mean, that's an object. And that's
a real solid old one, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got it in one. It's a solid old one, yes. And that's what they make. They make solid old things, and they guarantee them against any manufacturing for the life of the product. And some of these staplers that they make have been in existence since the 1950s and are still being used. They're just, and if we could move to much more robust, durable products and stop getting hung up on the price, it would be so much better for all of us.
Another question. I used to have a bookshop in Bath.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
And I used to go around to other people and say, if you're throwing away brown paper or cardboard, why don't you give it to me? And then I can use it to mail the books out. So I'm just wondering, have you been trying to encourage people to cooperate, and something that's trash to one person can be a treasure to another?
Yeah, well, we've been trying to get the whole industry to reuse their packaging, because stationery has to be well packaged because it's quite heavy and things like that. So we're certainly around Bath. We've got lots of shops who know that we take boxes and loose fill and things like that. But in a way, it's more important to get our suppliers to also change what they're doing, because they're huge and they're supplying lots of people. And, you know, we have a go at them about plastic bubble stuff, loose fill, you know, in there. And we keep on asking them, you've got boxes that cut down, that fold flat, you know, they've even got score marks around them. But because they want to fill up so many boxes so fast, you know, because they want to try and maximize their turnover and profit, it's about scale and speed. That's why they use the bubble wrap, you know, and they use the bubble fills in it, rather than cutting down the boxes, flattening it down, and you wouldn't need to put any loose fill in it at all, you know. And so we've had a bit of success with that, in that one of our major suppliers now no longer sends us any plastic packaging, but they keep on sending it to other people. So they can do it, you know, they can do it. Which is the interesting thing.
Any more questions in the room?
Right. Thank you. My question may be slightly controversial, because I'd like to know why you feel, after many years of hard endeavor, that things haven't taken off perhaps as you would have liked.
Well, I think that's one of the joys of life. Things don't turn out quite the way individuals want them to, you know? But what I would say is that the difference now compared to when I started 30 years ago is that there are all the things we need, and all the businesses and people and ideas we need to move to a different type of economy and business production society. You know, it's all in place now, whereas 30 years ago it wasn't. There was virtually nothing, you know, and you know, there wasn't even really sort of, you know, any much economic theory behind it at all. But there are now places like New Economics Foundation, you know, but all the products are all there as well too. I mean, most of my customers are green and ethical businesses, and they operate in everything from a green undertaker to a green goldsmith, you know, and everything you could possibly think of. You know, there is somebody doing something in that area and has worked out how to do this activity in a low impact way. So once we get the political will to actually make that shift to a different type of economy and society, it will be relatively easy, because all the stuff is there now. So that's, I think, is a fantastic thing, and a quite achievement. Sad that we're now running out of time and we have to do something pretty dramatic, but we have governments, and local authority has claimed this is a climate emergency. So if it's an emergency, we need to act, and act quite fast. And we can do, which is the good thing.
Well, I suppose my follow-up to that is, I think you've really got to recognize that perhaps the biggest drawback for societies at large is the rapidly increasing population of the world. I was born just at the start of the Second World War. The world population then was 2.8 billion. Today it's 8 billion. Now, that leads to mass production, that leads to greater demand. And I think to go back to a society which is more ecologically friendly will be very, very difficult when you have that continually increasing in population.
Well, it's a sort of it's a sort of imperative of the increasing population, because it's quite clear that if you have the standard economic model we have now to deal with that population growth, it's a complete disaster. We just cannot fulfill their expectations. So we must move to something which is much lower impact and reduces all this economic waste. It's this vast amount of economic waste that's causing all the damage. It's not that we can't sustain the populations, we're just giving them things which are so wasteful to produce, you know, and don't ultimately satisfy their needs as well too. And if we switched over to something that was much more satisfactory to people, you know, then yeah, we can support the population. It is possible, I believe. There you go.
Right, if there's no more questions in the room or online, I think it remains to say thank you very much indeed. Let's put our hands together to say thank you for a hopeful look at the future.
Yes.